You're listening to Females in Fantasy, a podcast elevating the voices of women authors of science fiction and fantasy who write about kick-ass heroines. I am your host, Brianna Da Silva, and this is episode 11. And before we get into today's interview, I have a big announcement. Yes, 2 announcements, 2 episodes in a row. I've been pretty productive lately, but this is a big one, and I am really excited to say that Females in Fantasy now has its own merchandise shop. I've been working really hard on this, so I am pretty relieved to finally release it to the world. So right now there are some t-shirts and mugs available with different slogans like "Ask me about my science fiction feminist agenda," or "Stop killing off queer characters," in all yelling caps, or my personal favorite, "If you can write about dragons and magic, you can write about a world where women are not oppressed." And there's also the artwork by Mireille Gash, which you see on the podcast cover art. So that really cool female warrior character. You can also get a t-shirt with her on it. So there are a lot of different color options available for the t-shirts, ladies in unisex sizes. And to celebrate the fact that this store is live, today only the shop, everything on the shop is going to be 20% off. And that is just going to be a brief sale just to celebrate the fact that it's live. So you can go to check that out. Go to shop.femalesinfantasy.com. Or if I am as effective in between the time of me recording this and the time of you listening to it, fingers crossed, you should also be able to go to femalesinfantasy.com and click on shop. But I don't have that set up yet, so no promises. But either way, the link will be in the description for this episode. Go and take advantage of the sale, the 20% off sale while it lasts. Because, I probably won't be offering that kind of a steep discount again anytime soon. But yeah, we'll see. So today we are talking with Emily Skrutskie, author of several different science fiction books, including The Abyss Surrounds Us, which is honestly one of my favorites. And then also her most recent release, HULLMETAL GIRLS, which you'll notice in the interview we talk about it as if it came out 2 days before this episode. It actually came out a week ago, and that is because a while ago I was sick, and so now all my episodes are like 1 week off from when they were supposed to be. But anyway, I hope you enjoy this conversation. Here is my talk with Emily. Welcome, Emily, to Females in Fantasy. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to have you on the podcast because I've actually really enjoyed the duology that you wrote. It's like one of my favorite things I've read this year, just letting you know. I've been really thinking ever since I read those books, like it'd be really awesome to have Emily on the show. I just want to say it's really an honor to have you.
It means so much to hear.
Yeah. So tell us about yourself and how you got into writing.
So I'm the author of 2 going on 3 YA science fiction books. The first book is The Abyss Surrounds Us, which is kind of like pirates versus sea monsters in the future. And my upcoming book, HULLMETAL GIRLS, is more of a Battlestar Galactica-esque thing. It's basically Battlestar Galactica with cyborg cops. And I got into writing at a really young age. I think it was really sort of Finding Nemo that pushed me towards like wanting to make movies to start.
Oh,
and then
really?
When I realized, oh wait, you need like a whole crew to do movies, and I can't do all that by myself, I kind of reoriented, and that was around the time that I saw Star Wars for the first time. So Star Wars was the big push that got me into being a storyteller. And so I actually wrote my first book when I was 15 years old, so almost 10 years ago now. And, that didn't really go anywhere. It was good practice. I wrote my second book in college, also good practice. And then the third book, the third completed manuscript that I ever wrote was The Abyss Surrounds Us. And that sold during my senior year of college, and here I am now.
Awesome. That's really cool to hear you say that Star Wars was what got you into storytelling, because that, for me, like I was writing when I was like a little kid, but I actually got interested in like filmmaking as a genre. So kind of the reverse of you, when I watched, I think it was when the third one, or episode 3, when that came out in the theaters. And that was really was influential for me. So that's pretty cool. Let's talk a little bit more about The Abyss Surrounds Us for a minute. So where did the idea originally come from for that story?
So I remember the exact kind of moment, the situation where the idea came to me, because I was on a bus on my way back to school from Thanksgiving break, and I had resolved to come up with one story idea every day in the month of December. So it was December 1st, and I was trying to come up with the first idea, and we were driving by some shipyards around Baltimore. And I remember kind of looking out and thinking a little bit about my summers on the West Coast and about the Pacific Ocean and about Pacific Rim, which I really liked and had just come out that summer. And there was this kind of synthesis of ideas where I was just looking at these giant tanker ships and imagining sea monsters in the water beside them. That was the kind of initial seed. And then I started thinking about, what kind of story would be interesting to explore in this world? Why would they have sea monsters? The sea monsters were to protect the boats. Okay, what are they to protect the boats from? Well, piracy has run rampant. We're in a much more water-dependent world because there's much more water in the world now that the polar ice caps have receded. And, stuff spiraled out from there until I found, the core of the story, which was that this girl had spent her whole life training sea monsters and getting ready to be a sea monster trainer. And then on her first mission, it all goes horrifically wrong. And she finds herself on the other side, training a sea monster for the pirates.
The concept is the concept was so much fun, and I love it really. I can tell some of your interest in film too, because I feel like the structure of the story is also kind of set up a lot like a movie, kind of like the pacing of it and whatnot. Was that something that you did intentionally, or was that just kind of something that happened naturally as you were writing it?
I think it is kind of instinct at this point. I learned so much of storytelling. Actually, the thing that really taught me storytelling was Pixar. I was obsessed with Pixar movies and with their storytelling process, the way that they would kind of discover the bones of these stories and revise them, and the way that they would throw things out that didn't work, where they were constantly creating. And I would listen to the director's commentaries on Pixar movies all the time to figure out exactly why these movies worked. And so a lot of just my storytelling instincts come from that education.
One thing, just to switch topics a little bit, one thing that I really appreciated also about that duology, and then we're gonna talk about your other book coming out in a second here, was it's like that kind of story, with future tech and sci-fi. It's like we get those kind of stories, a lot because it's an awesome genre, right? But it's always with straight white guys that are leading it, and so nothing against straight white guys. We just kind of have an overabundance of them in action adventure stories. But with this duology, we have a woman of color, and the romantic subplot is with another girl. So what was some of your process with coming up with these characters, and can you relate to either of them or not relate to them, and how was that like?
Well, so a lot of the choices I made I remember this playwriting lesson that I had in college where the playwright Paula Vogel came in and she talked to us. And one of the things she said that really stuck with me is that there's no such thing as a non-political choice. Every time you're making you're making a decision that is an active decision, and it is weighing, your values and what is important to you. And knowing that, I said, we have too many white girls. We have too many straight girls. Why not tell a story about something that's at least fresher than? I feel like it was almost kind of an expectation. The market instinct would be to have, this would be the story of a girl, and she'd probably be white, and she would go and she would meet this pirate boy who da 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 da. And the thing was, actually, the queer romance in the book kind of came less from, wanting to tell a queer story, and more from wanting that kind of character to be a girl. Because I was reading all these books I was reading the Grisha trilogy, I was reading Shatter Me and stuff like that, books with these bad boy protagonist or love interests that, were clearly on the wrong side of some things morally, but were, nevertheless attractive to the protagonist and they had this kind of push and pull of could this person be redeemed? Could this person be explained in a way that would make it okay to fall in love with them? And it was just always a guy. It was always, he had tattoos, and he had some secret about his family that he wasn't letting on about, and I just wanted a female character to have those qualities, and so, but I also want to have a female protagonist, so why not have them fall in love?
There you go. It's almost like sometimes people get stuck into these ruts, I think, where when we expect certain kinds of characters to have certain kinds of roles or certain, certain gender roles or whatever, it limits us, especially with like our good friend heteronormativity. So that also be like, we can think outside of those boxes. There's so many different ways to tell stories, and there's so many different experiences in humanity. So yeah, it's always refreshing to see that reflected in fiction.
Yeah, just ultimately, I didn't want to contribute to the massive pile of the stuff that we already had. I wanted to do something different and fun and new, and that's where we ended up.
Yep. So speaking of something new, tell us about your book, which actually, so we're recording this right now in May, but by the time this podcast episode comes out, it will have been 2 days after it released.
Awesome.
So tell us that day. Yeah. So tell us, give us, you already explained HULLMETAL GIRLS in the beginning, but tell us a little bit more about that story, and then also like where the idea for this one came from.
Yeah, so the quick pitch is that it's Battlestar Galactica with cyborg cops, and the longer pitch is that it's about these two girls who are living in this fleet of ships who have been wandering the stars for 300 years looking for a new planet to call home. And both of these girls end up becoming these kind of jacked up cyborg cops. One of them knowingly volunteers her body and her autonomy to do this because her brother is sick. She doesn't have the means to care for him, and for her little sister too. So she sacrifices herself basically for their sake and becomes this jacked up cyborg cop, and her whole salary will go to her siblings' care. The other girl wakes up in this jacked up cyborg body and has no idea why this has happened to her. And so she's trying to figure out what exactly is buried in her missing memories, because she can remember that she was from the front end of the fleet. She used to be very privileged. She still like has all those gut instincts of kind of looking down on the poorer people and not really understanding them, because she's never really had to think about what they how they think, how they live. But now she's telepathically linked to three others and has to kind of come to understand them a little bit better. And in the meantime, there's also a kind of conspiracy afoot, because there is this revolution brewing in the fleet. Because after
naturally
years of not coming, or 300 years of wandering the stars and not finding a planet, people are starting to get pretty pissed off at the management and pushing back against the government that's setting the fleet direction. So that's HULLMETAL GIRLS in a nutshell. We go from
That sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun. Oh man, there's so many elements in there that I love. You've got the like Generation Starship stuff going on. You've got the like warrior women and technology, and yeah, there's a lot that I know I'm going to enjoy. So tell us a little bit more about those essential protagonists and their relationship to each other. So I heard rumors that this is not a sapphic plot, but that one of the main characters is Arrow Ace. Is that correct?
Aisha, one of the main characters is Arrow Ace, and the other is, there is a moment on the page where she's asked about her sexuality and she realizes she can't actually define it. But it kind of spirals into more stuff thinking about her past. So she's not as explicitly defined on the page. But Aisha identifies on the page as Arrow Ace, which was very important to me to have, because actually in Abyss, it's never really stated. It's just kind of, implied that both of them are lesbians. When that's, how I went about writing them, but I never actually said on the page. But in HULLMETAL GIRLS, I wanted to have a scene where the kids actually talk about how they define themselves. And it comes at kind of this fun comedic moment, but it was one of the cornerstone scenes for me as far as like doing things that I really wanted to do in this manuscript.
Yeah, and that's so important, especially I feel like if it's something futuristic that like, sometimes if we're writing something that's maybe in the past where they didn't have those kind of terms, or it's like some sort of alternate universe where, maybe it's not clear whether people define themselves in the same way, but like, hey, this is in the future, so why not? And I just realized I should define those terms just in case someone's listening, which is actually pretty common. A lot of people don't know what those terms mean. Aroace is short for aromantic, asexual, which just means that it's someone that doesn't have any romantic or sexual attractions, or at least like literal or no. Would you agree with that definition?
Yeah, exactly. Someone who doesn't experience those attractions or just have those essential wants. It doesn't necessarily mean that they will not get into romantic relationships. It doesn't necessarily mean that they won't have sex, but it means that they just don't want it, which is a hard thing to like explain, because not wanting something is when you say I don't want that, it's seen as like a negative thing instead of a neutral thing, but it's a neutral thing in this case.
Yeah, I like thinking about it that way, especially since it's like it differs from person to person too, right? Because it's kind of like there's a spectrum too, even within those identities. And I've talked to a lot of like different ace and arrow and arrow ace friends and people that I know online, and it's always like every single story is different.
Yeah, exactly. In writing Aisha, I had to be very specific when I envisioned exactly what kind of ace she was, because to me she's a little bit more sex repulsed than some people, which is a spectrum in asexuality that just is another like complicating factor in how you conceive of this scale between allosexual and asexual and demisexual somewhere in the middle, and different aspects of asexuality.
Yeah. So what's something that you want to say with this book, or something that you want readers to come away with?
This book for me was really about autonomy. It's on basically every level. It's about what we choose, why we choose it, what's driving our decision making, and especially in the case of, well, actually in both the case of Aisha and Key, as we get into kind of the mystery behind Key, we see that she's dealing with something a little bit similar to Aisha, where she's sacrificed something, and and maybe it wasn't necessarily worth it. And so I think that what I was trying to untangle and unpack is how far it's okay to go when, something major is on the line. How much of yourself is it okay to give? Because you do have to consider what you're giving up for yourself when you make these blind sacrifices. It was actually kind of inspired a lot by, I don't think it's really a coincidence that HULLMETAL GIRLS and The Hunger Games have the same letters in the title. Because I was really thinking a lot about, that cornerstone moment in the Hunger Games, where Katniss sacrifices herself without thought for her sister, and just kind of circling back to the choice and going, is that really okay though? That's not a healthy thing to do, right? Like there's something beneath that we have to unpack, and so that's something I was kind of delving into with HULLMETAL GIRLS.
Cool. All right. So I've got a question from one of my patrons. Brennan asks, why did you study film? Was it just to be knowledgeable about already created films, or were you studying it in order to make films yourself? If the latter, do you have any short films on YouTube or somewhere that we could see?
I studied film because I wanted to make films. Yeah, I was very taken with the idea of, directing and with animation. And I was actually studying both film and computer science because I wanted to understand both the creative aspects of filmmaking and the technical aspects. And so actually in my day job now, I work at a visual effects house where
that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm doing both. So I'm combining both of those interests and backgrounds. And I think that one of the things that I really liked about studying film was that it introduced me to a form of storytelling that isn't necessarily, it's not necessarily applicable to the way that you tell a story when you're writing a novel. But I found that it had these, I would learn these lessons from filmmaking and think, okay, how would I express this on the page? It doesn't necessarily translate, but what if I tried to do this and this and this? And of course, there's, structure stuff. There's all sorts of translatable lessons that you can learn from studying storytelling in other mediums.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so this is a very different kind of a question, but I like when I'm talking with someone that writes science fiction, I like to kind of end on a like looking to the future note. We're going to start a little dark and then we're going to get it light. So first of all, what are some visions of the future that frighten you?
Well, one of them that I think is just kind of inevitable at this point and really informed a lot of the Abyss series was climate change. This isn't, we're past the point where this is something that's preventable. It's something that's going to happen and that we're going to have to deal with, is the fact that we have permanently changed the landscape of this planet, and we are not necessarily prepared for the fallout of that effect. Yeah,
it is also interesting to think about like how if we're able to, enough of us are able to survive past that, like how things be rebuilt and whatnot, and which is kind of interesting. One of the things that I like about the Abyss Around Us, because it's like what is it? It's supposed to be. I don't remember. Does it have like a specific timeline for when that's supposed to take place, or is it vague?
It's about 140 years in the future. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's after all of these effects have happened, and it's really interesting actually, because I get people calling it post-apocalyptic or dystopian, and for one thing, I understand where that impulse comes from, but to me, it's just futuristic. It's just the logical future. There's no like apocalyptic event. It's just the natural degrading of our ice caps and the eventual effects that global warming will have on our oceans.
Okay. So what are some visions of the future that inspire you? Now that we've got that dark, heavy thing out of the way.
Definitely space exploration. I mean, with the kind of, both my parents are astronomers. And so I grew up, surrounded by this kind of stuff. My mother worked on the Voyager missions, the Cassini mission. She's on New Horizons right now. So she's exploring Pluto.
Wow.
And that's the amazing. Future of, exploring other worlds is extremely exciting to me. This is something that's just, I've my whole life have been surrounded by the possibility of not just space flight, but, telescopes and looking deeper into our universe and seeing really the possibilities that are out there. So that's always going to excite me. And it's part of the reason why I write science fiction.
Yeah, it's funny. I certainly didn't plan it this way, but those two questions apply to both of your stories. Like one for each. It
worked out that way.
Yeah. All right. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today. How can people keep up with you?
So I'm on Twitter at Skrutskie. I'm on Instagram also at Skrutskie. And I'm on Tumblr also at Skrutskie. Keep it very simple.
All right. Easy to remember. I'll include the spelling for that too in the show notes if people are not sure how to spell your last name. All right. Thank you again and have a wonderful evening. That was my conversation with Emily Skrutskie. As a reminder, you can find her new book, HULLMETAL GIRLS, wherever books are sold. Also, don't forget to take advantage of the 20% off discount at shop.femalesandfantasy.com. You can keep up with the podcast on Twitter and also now on Facebook. So if you traverse that corner of the internet, there is now a page for the Females of Fantasy podcast. So you can go and like it and get updates and all that good stuff there. Also, if you are on Twitter, do not miss out on Saturday, July 28th. We're having a Females in Fantasy Twitter chat. And those are always a lot of fun. You get to talk with people literally all around the world about a topic in speculative fiction, which this time is going to be witches. So like the representation of those characters, what they mean, etc. So we'll be doing that on July 28th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can follow that with the hashtag Females in Fantasy. Next time on the podcast, we'll be talking with Aliette de Bodard, author of a whole bunch of things, honestly, including the Zuyo universe, which is a collection of different short stories and novels that imagine a high-tech future for humanity among the stars that is dominated by Confucianist culture as opposed to Western culture. So we get to hear from her awesome mind in a couple of weeks. Until then, this has been the Females in Fantasy podcast. I am Brianna Da Silva. Thanks for listening.